So what does it mean to you to be an author writing in a time of war?
Well, I think I've always written books in the Napoleonic and post-Napoleonic era, so war is always part of the landscape of the books I've written. But I think since our country's been at war itself, it heightens the awareness of that. I don't know that I consciously deal with it differently, but I think I'm more aware of it. It probably has a greater resonance for me as a writer, and therefore in the minds of the characters I'm writing about. It's interesting, the war in Afghanistan had started when I was writing Beneath the Silent Moon, and I think even that influenced somehow I dealt with the characters in the book who've been in the Peninsular War. Francisco, Tommy, Charles, and Melanie, and sort of what their experiences, how that shaped them. When Beneath the Silent Moon was first published in hardcover in 2003, right as the war in Iraq was starting, and I would go to do book signings and readings and thank people for being there and say, I know this is a really difficult time in the world right now. And then I'd go into reading from the book, which in some ways is so removed from the world of the war. And yet, the section I'd read is is a chase sequence early on in the book in Covent Garden Market, and it involves a character named Manon, who's also been influenced a lot by the war. So, I mean, in some ways my books are very removed from what's happening in the world today, and yet at least for me, writing them, there are definitely resonances.
What was Manon's experience in the war, and how did that influence her?
Manon's French, and she was in love with a man who died in Russia, in Napoleon's campaign in Russia, where so many men did die. And she's now living in Paris, where at one point she says, if my fiancé was still alive, he could be arrested for having, if he'd been alive when Napoleon returned from all that, he would have fought with him again, and he now might be executed for having done so. The White Terror, and she's become involved with Francisco Soro, who is a spy agent, Spanish, who Charles and Melanie knew, and he's come to France after the war and become involved with Manon. So Manon's young; she's in her early 20s, so her whole adult life and even childhood have been shaped by the Napoleonic Wars.
And how does that influence her still in the time period of the book?
Well, she's cynical. She's very armored against loss. I wouldn't say she's afraid to love, but she's definitely aware that you can lose, that you can love someone and lose them very easily, and that things can be taken away. She's very cautious. That's why Anne doesn't trust anyone, which is the whole chase occurs because Charles and Melanie are trying to find her to help her, and she runs away. And then there is someone else who's actually trying to kill her, who becomes involved in the chase. So she's does not trust easily.